The majority of our research is really centered around the corporate work environment, right? And then we dab a little bit into mobility. Now I'm going to pass the conversation on to Erik Anderson with Microsoft, and he's going to talk very much about their research around their team members' experience working from home in the COVID area. And Erik, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me okay? Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and anytime I get a chance to talk about the work we've been doing and some of the research we've been doing over the last 6 months, I jump at it because it's pretty fascinating. And taking a step back to tell you a little bit about what I do at Microsoft. So my team at Microsoft, we kind of have this unofficial mission that we say amongst ourselves that we're just trying to make work suck less. And we think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And specifically what we're doing in that space is we've been incubating a business within Microsoft that helps companies use passively collected data from their organizations. So if you think about the workers at a credit union, a large majority of those workers we would call knowledge workers. They're doing really cognitive type of work. It's very collaborative. It may not be very process driven. And oftentimes there's not a lot of ways to measure how successfully that work is being done or how efficiently or effectively it's being done. And the common thing about knowledge workers is they all use technology to do their work. You use things like email, instant messaging, this Zoom call we're on. All of the collaboration that you're doing is via some sort of technology. And when that's done, data is essentially created. We call it the digital exhaust of people collaborating is created. And that data is sitting there and no one's really tapped into that data before. And so what we've been trying to do is help companies take advantage of that. And so they can use that data to do a number of things. But if you think about, Mark mentioned it, the way people collaborate is a big driver of the culture of a company. If you actually have data that you can capture around that and you bring some context about your business into it, all of a sudden you have this wealth of information you can do something with. So, go back to the end of February when we all basically got sent home and we're told not to come back. Which we assumed probably wouldn't be that long, but here we are now months later. In fact, I remember the day that I left the office for the last time, I had grabbed a banana for lunch and I ended up not eating it. I left it on my desk and I went home that night. And then I got this email that said, don't come to work the next day. And like 3 weeks later, I thought to myself, man, when I left, there was a banana sitting on my desk. And I was like, I hope someone grabbed that thing and threw it in the garbage. Otherwise, it might be a pretty bad sight. But what we recognize that, hey, this is something that's never really happened before in the workplace. And we should maybe take a look at it, and not having any objectives in mind other than just to see what we learned. We started looking at the data we can get about our broader organization in Microsoft. And then ultimately we started looking at more and more parts of Microsoft through it. And we started by just publishing some blog posts about it. And ultimately it was mentioned that some of this was put together into an HBR article. But we've really been using these learnings, and we've been working now with customers to help them get similar learnings about their companies. And we wanted to just answer some questions like, how are work and life going to be integrated when people are sitting at home and their kids aren't at school and all that sorts of things. So that was a big area. The other one was, we are always really interested in how networks help people do their work. And so if you think of a credit union, not every single group within that credit union is only working within their own silo. There's collaboration that has to happen across the whole credit union. And people form networks when they do that. And they'll form those networks inside of the company, and they'll form those networks outside of the company. And we find that the networks of people are really strong enablers of them to be successful. So we're really curious, when all of a sudden everyone gets sent out of the office, they get sent home, they're disconnected, would they be able to maintain those networks? How would those networks evolve? We had hypotheses like, people's networks would basically just shrink down to those people they were the closest with, and they would lose all of the people on their periphery of their network. So we had these types of hypotheses that we were just wondering, hey, what could we learn as we look through it? So we looked at a bunch of data, and we started to learn some things. And I just thought I'd talk about kind of 3 themes of those. And the first is, we were pretty surprised how quickly the norms changed that we saw that teams were using to get their work done. A couple of those were actually how people were collaborating. So we looked at kind of the makeup of meetings within our organization, and we saw this phenomenon that we started calling the rise of the 30-minute meeting. And what we saw was these short meetings, 30 minutes or less, increased over 20%. So people were spending a lot more times in short meetings. We looked at some of those attributes. They tended to be smaller meetings also. And we did some kind of targeted surveys amongst people to learn more about that. And we found that the reason people were meeting was actually shifting. It wasn't just, hey, I'm having a meeting because I have some, project I'm working on and we need to, get status, or we need to come up with an idea to move it forward. But it was, people were setting up meetings to stay connected, right? So things that they used to be able to do by, walking down the hallway or grabbing lunch with someone or things like that, they were shifting into more formalized meetings. But we also saw that longer meetings were actually decreasing, and meetings that were longer than an hour decreased by more than 10%. And what we learned from that was people were actually saying, hey, when I'm sitting remotely on a video conference or a voice conference call, they're saying, hey, we just don't have the stamina to stay engaged longer, right? It's more draining on ourselves to stay engaged in a longer meeting than it is when you're sitting in the room and you kind of have a completely different atmosphere and experience. So that was pretty interesting. Just from a very quick thing happened. We saw this happening within the first 3 to 4 weeks of people being at home, that this was a pretty clear signal that we saw. The other thing that we saw happen right away was the working patterns throughout the day started to shift. So we kind of baselined against a previous period, and you saw kind of activity of collaboration. It could kind of rise and spike in the morning, then it would dip during the lunchtime, then it would rise again in the afternoon and dip right in the evening time, kind of the evening commute time, between 5 and 7 in the evening. And very quickly we saw that morph, and we saw the first thing that happened was the dip at lunchtime started to go away. So there wasn't such a pronounced time when everyone was sort of taking that lunch break in the middle of the day. And we started to see collaboration, especially formalized meetings that typically were happening in the mornings, were shifting to the afternoons. And so we started sort of digging into this, and what we learned was people were having to integrate a lot more within their days, especially when school was still in place in the spring. And a lot of parents were helping their kids with school in the morning, so thus they shifted meetings to the afternoon. And then some of their work that was done outside of meetings via email or instant messaging or whatnot started to sort of spill over into the evening hours. Between like 8 and 11 p.m., we had a pretty drastic increase in Microsoft in email and IM activity in that time period. So this whole concept of the traditional workday pretty quickly started to get thrown out the window, and people were kind of making their own work days. So the thing we actually got pretty worried about that kind of leads into my next theme, which is more around well-being. And Mark talked a lot about well-being as well, is if all of a sudden work days are having less boundaries with their non-work days, are people going to be candidates for burnout? Are they being able to connect and separate from their workday? And what we saw was when we looked at managers, so people who were managing other people within our teams, they actually took a huge amount of the brunt. Their collaboration increased on average by 8 hours per week. So that's basically adding an entire day just on collaboration. And we were realizing that the managers were basically taking the brunt of this massive change, of managing this massive change for their teams. And they were having to deal with the things that they were going through personally, but also what their teams were going through. And, I think luckily Microsoft did make a huge emphasis on enabling managers through that time, providing a lot of resources and that sort of thing. But still, it was something that we didn't really expect to see such a dramatic impact on managers themselves. The flip side of that is the data showed that managers were probably the biggest thing that could make teams successful, kind of responding to the change. In fact, we looked at data about employees and managers and how much time they were spending in one-on-one meetings and what was the potential impact of that. And we saw employees that spent regular time with their managers in a weekly one-on-one, their overall kind of work throughout the pandemic, it increased 60% less than their peers who didn't spend time with their managers in one-on-ones. And that was pretty interesting because all of a sudden we had real data that showed, okay, managers, when they do spend time with their employees, are actually providing a tangible impact on the well-being of those employees with their ability to manage their work and prioritize. And we went and talked with some both employees and managers about that. And it was very clear that there was a lot more focus on prioritization and managing that integration of work and life than we had ever had before in these types of meetings. So that was a pretty positive thing that we saw.